Hello, boat anchor fans. What we are looking at today is an Eico. You can see the name in the corner. The Eico 720 amateur radio transmitter. It's a transmitter only. From the 1960s, early 1960s. In fact, I believe that it was available in 1960. It was crystal controlled. You can see the crystal socket here. And otherwise put out about 90 watts, or I should say had an input power of 90 watts, and was made for the novice operator. And then when the novice was replaced by a higher class license, you could load it up to higher power. But as a novice back in the day, you were limited to 75 watts, indicated by the about 130 milliamp load on the plate. So it was a beginner's radio, but then it could be upgraded nicely to a phone transmitter, AM phone, by adding the Eico 730 plate modulator. This is the Eico 720 transmitter, as you can see down here. So here's the transmitter ready for business. I've loaded up the loading and the dipped the plate, provided appropriate grid drive, and we can look at the grid drive and the grid position. About 3 mils, a little bit less. And when we key down, gives us a nice note. And you can see the power output, about 40 watts. So crystal's in place here. This is a 40 meter crystal. And if you look at the back, what's very important to note on the back is that there's a little plug, a socket plug, an octal socket plug, and there's 2 positions here that are jumpered, pins 4 and 8, I believe. And without that plug in there, or without those pins shorted, the transmitter will not function. So very important to know that when you attempt to operate one of these radios. Okay, so let's go through the radio, starting with the front. We've got your plate off and grid for the meter, function switches for standby, tune where you increase or decrease the grid drive, antenna loading for bringing up the gain for the antenna loading, to be followed by the plate tuning, which you will tune for the dip. And in the old radios, you needed the final circuit in resonance, and so you would load the antenna using antenna loading, and then you would dip the final using the plate tuning. Very common in all the tube radios. Drive for increasing the grid drive where needed, and grid tuning for peaking the grid drive. If you needed more, you'd add more using the drive control. The crystal in the center here could be used to control the frequency. You could also add a VFO, variable frequency oscillator, in the back, and then you wouldn't need the crystal, and you could travel all over the bands as the VFO allowed. The key plug right here, of course, a CW only transmitter, so there is no phone connector. Looking down from the top of the radio, transformers over here for the power supply section. There's the back of the meter, the voltage regulator for the high voltage, tuning capacitors, tank circuit, coils for the bands, and the final amplifier. Final amplifier tube in this radio is a 6146 venerable final amplifier used in many old radios in that era, used in the military as well. Very highly respected amplifier tube, putting out approximately 40 to 60 watts, somewhere in that output range. In the back we've got your coax connector, SO239. You have an octal plug. Remember what we said at the beginning was you need to short a few pins on this connector in order for the radio to operate. The reason for that is it was made to connect directly to a modulator, the Eico 730 plate modulator, plugged in here and provided the correct connections. Without the amplifier, you need to short 2 pins on this octal plug or the radio will not work. Here's your connection to the VFO if you so desire, and the switch to choose between the front crystal socket or the VFO on the left here. And your fuse for line fuse, and there's your power cord. In the little covered area here, buffer tubes and coils for the bands. So this is protected and shielded from oscillation and keep RF out. The tube shields as well help that. So the tune-up procedure is fairly straightforward. If you've got a key plug, make sure you've got your key plugged in for CW and your key available. Start with the standby positions. When you turn it on, make sure it's in the standby mode, and then let the tubes warm up, okay, because it will take a few minutes for the tubes to warm up. After they are warm, you're going to put it in the tune position. From tune position, we're going to get some grid current here. The book says 1.5 mils of grid current for CW use minimum. So we want to key down and make sure that we are in the tune position, then adjust the drive for about 1.5 mils, thereabouts. It can be between 1.5 and 2, and then peak that with the grid tuning. So I'm peaking that, and then reduce the drive to make it where you want it, around right around 2 mils for CW is fine, so right about there. And you can put it back in standby temporarily. Make sure you've got a crystal in there or a VFO plugged in the back with the switch set to the VFO position. And we looked at the back panel earlier. So now we're ready to tune the final, that is to see the output, and so we're going to put it into transmit, and we're going to put the switch to plate. Now I have the key activated, but we don't want that initially. And you should have no meter readings. So there should be no power output at this point until the key is depressed. Let me close the key. I'm going to do it just manually so I can tune it. First thing you want to do, looking at the plate tuning, is you're going to use that plate tuning control to dip the final. And so I'm using that to dip the final. And as I do that, I'm going to go over and see that with the final dipped. As I go back and forth, I'm peaking the output. So there we have about 60 watts output. We can increase the loading through the antenna loading. Depending upon what kind of antenna you're using, that position is going to change. But when you're done peaking the antenna loading, you want to go back and dip that final. So dipping the final, the plate tuning, is where you want to make your last effort when you're tuning the radio. Once that's done, you're set, and then you can use your key to start transmitting. You'll notice that your plate meter should be reading around between 160 and 200 mils roughly, and that translates into an input of about 90 watts, and with the efficiency of this radio, about 50 to 60 watts output. So there's your tune-up procedure for the Eico 730 transmitter, 1960s radio. Just a wonderful piece of gear, and I hope you get yours back on the air. If you have any questions, you can leave them, and I'll try to answer them for you. Good luck.